I would like to call to order the July 11th, 2017 Board of Directors meeting of the Des Moines Public Schools. Please take the roll.
Ms. Bozen?
Here.
Natasha Nukin? Ms. Langford?
Here.
Ms. Caldwell-Johnson?
Here.
Ms. Ellsburn?
Here.
Ms. Anderson?
Here.
Mr. Barron?
Here.
First item tonight is the approval of the agenda. I would like to ask for a motion and a second to approve the agenda absent item number 8 on consent, which will be scheduled later in the year for approval of the board report schedule. Are there any other requests for changes to the agenda? Hearing none, I would entertain a motion.
I'll move approval. I'll second.
So we have a motion and approval to approve the agenda absent consent item number 8. Please vote. Motion carries 6-0. The next item on our agenda is the approval of the minutes. May I have a motion and a second to approve the June 20th, 2017 minutes?
A motion.
I'll second.
We have a motion and a second to approve the June 20th minutes. Are there any corrections or discussion? Hearing none, please vote. Motion carries 6-0. The next item on our agenda.
For the record, it was 5.
I'm sorry, 5-1.
With one
One
abstention.
abstention.
Yep.
Thank you. The next item on our agenda is district recognitions. Dr. Ahart.
Good evening, Board. For this year's award season, rather than winning the same old plaques for our newsletters and social media and the like, our communications team focused on their visual work. Tonight, I'm pleased to share with you some of the results. First, as you may recall, a couple of months ago, we presented a video that our DMPS-TV staff produced on behalf of the New Promise of Iowa campaign launched by the Iowa Association of School Boards. The video featured the inspiring story of Bayou Fisher, a Roosevelt student with albinism who was adopted from China at the age of 2. As our video shared, she is not only a successful student, but also an outstanding young dancer. This video was recently presented with a Bronze Telly Award. I just want to note that unlike the Olympics, bronze is actually the second highest honor given out by this film and television organization. And I'd like to ask Kyle Nicely to please come forward so we can present him with this impressive trophy.
I just wanted to say thank you for the opportunity to serve the Des Moines Public Schools and continue this great work. Looking forward to the future. May there be lights, camera, and action. Thank you.
That's good.
As you know from our website and social media, our communications team puts a lot of effort into taking top-notch photography. The Iowa School Public Relations Association has a photography category in their annual awards program, and so this year we entered 9 photos taken by 4 different members of our communications team. All 9 photos earned awards, and this image, which should be appearing on your screen, it is indeed, taken by John Lemons of a well-lit violinist at Hoover High School, received the Blue and Gold Award as the Best Education Photo of 2016. If John would please come forward to receive his award.
Just want to say it's great to work for the school district, and it's great to tell stories of students and teachers and everyone that are working here. So thank you.
Thank you.
And finally, another photo taken by our communication staff will be shown this summer in New York City, and that is appearing on your screen at present. The Aperture Foundation, founded by Ansel Adams and other famous photographers back in the 1950s, is holding an exhibit called On Freedom, with images that convey that concept in different ways. This photo from one of our Know Your Rights forums for new refugee and immigrant families was taken by Phil Rader and will join the works of other photographers from around the world. The exhibit opens in New York City this Thursday night and runs through late August. It's only fitting that John and Phil just returned from San Antonio, where they made a presentation on good photography and education to the Council of the Great City Schools. And as long as we're on the subject of our communications team, after weeks and months of their work, I hope everyone has had a chance to visit our new district website. which launched at the end of June. There are actually some new features that will be activated over the next few days, including a searchable staff directory and a virtual backpack. I hope everyone makes good use of the site as we get nearer to the first day of school and throughout the school year. Thank you, and thanks Phil and your team. Great job.
Great. Congratulations. Before continuing with our regular meeting, I want to remind the audience that we allow any person the opportunity to speak to the board for 5 minutes following the presentation of an agenda item. If anyone wishes to speak to an agenda item, please go to the information table to sign up. Remarks must be germane to the agenda, and we ask that you avoid reference to personalities and character attacks, as those types of comments serve no productive purpose. As a reminder to the board and public, the board will not engage in discussion or deliberation with the speaker regarding comments made to the agenda items. Discussion and deliberation will remain among the board members at the board table, with speakers' comments informing said discussion, deliberation, and determination as deemed necessary. We appreciate your input. Mr. Barron, I believe that you have the consent motion.
I do. I move that the board approve the consent items in accordance with the recommended action for each item on the consent agenda, including bills previously authorized, certified, and approved for payment by the board secretary in the amount of $12,336,513.83 and procurement card transactions in the amount of $1,205,825.52.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
We have a motion from Barron and a second from Bozen on the consent items. Is there any discussion? Hearing none, please vote. Motion carries 6-0. The next item on our agenda this evening is item number E1, open enrollment late applications for denial. I'll ask the superintendent to please introduce the item.
We are getting into the hot and heavy season for open enrollment in and out applications. This first item is denial of late applications for the 17-18 school year.
Do we have a motion and a second to deny the late applications for open enrollment?
I'll move approval.
Second.
We have a motion by Bozen and a second by Barron to deny the open enrollment late applications. Do we have anyone signed to speak for this? No speakers. Are there any board comments or questions? Hearing none, we have a motion and a second on the table to deny the late applications. Please vote. Motion carries 6-0. The next item on our agenda is item number E2, open enrollment appeals for denial. I'll ask the superintendent to introduce the item.
Yes, as part of our open enrollment process, if an open enrollment out is denied, there is an opportunity for a student and his or her family to appeal. Some of those are granted based on some hardship circumstances, and others are not. These include those appeals that have been denied.
Thank you, Dr. Ahart. May I have a motion and a second to deny the open enrollment appeals?
I'll move.
We have a motion from Barron, a second from Langford, to deny the request for open enrollment. We do have a speaker on this item, Cindy Fox. If you could please come forward and state your name and address for the record before sharing your comments. Thank you for being here.
Hi, my name is Cynthia Fox, or Cindy Fox. My address, 4135 Cornell Street, Des Moines, Iowa. I'd like to ask you to consider open enrollment for Layden Haltner to homeschool. He's had health issues and anxiety issues and bullying issues this last year and had trouble with his attendance. We like to get him grounded to continue his education to come back to public school the following year. Thank you.
Thank you for being here. We do have a motion and a second on the table to deny the appeals. Are there any comments or questions before we move to the vote? What's that?
I was going to say, I don't think it's one of the names on this. So.
It was on the.
Yeah.
It was the prior item.
Okay.
I didn't see that on there either. Okay.
Are there any questions?
There are none here.
Hearing none, we do have a motion and a second. Please vote. The request has been approved. The request to deny all appeals has been approved. The vote is 5 yes, 1 no, and no abstentions. The next item on our agenda is item number E3, monitoring reports for pre-K programs. While the staff is coming forward, I don't know if the superintendent has anything he wants to share before we move to the presentation.
Yes, so we'll have two reports tonight that are, as we discussed at the last meeting, two reports that are focused on 2 of the 4 priority areas for the board. The first one is the pre-K programs report, and you'll notice that there's not a full monitoring report as we typically do. We did not do that for the first one, so we're just being consistent with the second one in the pre-K programs report. And so we have Susie and Celeste here to present. We're trying to put, and Angela, sorry, and we're trying to put a bit more of a narrative feel to it. So there's more of a, instead of just seemingly reciting data, giving more of the story behind the numbers and what those numbers really tell us as a system. So I will turn it over to Susie, Angela, and Celeste.
Before you move forward, let me just also mention that the board will be reviewing a policy relative to pre-K later this evening. So this really is just a receive and file for the board, no action required. Thank you.
All right, good evening. We're here tonight to give an update on the progress in regard to preschool since our last presentation. And we're going to cover student achievement progress as well as give you a clear understanding of where we are heading as a department. And as Mr. Ahart said, I have Susie Guest here tonight, our program administrator, as well as her leadership team, Angie Constable and Celeste Kelly. So what are the key indicators that we're looking at when measuring progress in preschool? Are students ready for kindergarten in the areas of literacy, math, and social emotional development? And are parents and families engaged in education of their children? These are our key performance indicators that we're looking at when we're measuring our progress. So we're going to take a deeper look over the next few slides so that you can see the progress made in each area and what our specific next steps are.
As Susie said, our key performance indicators, the first one we're going to take a look at is in the area of literacy. There are 2 assessment tools that we use to monitor our progress in the area of literacy, and the first is the GOLD assessment, the Teaching Strategies GOLD, which is mandated by Iowa Code. And what you'll see on this slide is that our progress over time, so it starts with spring 2015, 16, 17, and actually has our projections for 2018. Our goal for the past several years has been 85%, and as you can see, we have either met our goal or come very close to that. It's been consistent over the last 3 years, and our projection for the fall, or for next spring, would be 89.14%. We do keep our goal consistent because it's a different group of students every year. The second assessment tool that we use to determine our achievement and to take a look at our progress is the FAST. And again, the FAST is it is a different type of assessment, and it's actually given to kindergarten students to look at progress. So all kindergarten students take this in the fall. And what this data shows is how did the students that attended pre-K in the 15-16 school year do on this fall 16 assessment. What this will show you is that we had 64.3% of our students were on track compared to our compared to students who did not attend preschool. That was 32.2% on track. I do want to point out here, when you're looking at the data, one of the things that we noticed was about our Hispanic subgroup. And those scores are lower than all of our other subgroups. So that is something that we need to pay attention to and that I'll be speaking to in a couple of slides as to what we're going to do next about that. The next slide actually shows our FAST composite scores over time. And what you can see is that we've increased scores each year with a projection for next fall at 66%. So we're projecting that 66% of students who attended preschool take the FAST will be on track next fall.
When you're talking about students who have attended preschool, are you talking about DMPS preschool
Yes.
and not other preschool experiences?
Yes.
Thank you.
And especially, yeah, these would be students that that are in kindergarten and attended DMPS preschool.
Just one more point of clarification. DMPS funded UPK programs,
Yes.
not just DMPS site-specific UPK programs.
I would have to take a look at that to make sure.
I think that would be an important distinction to figure out how we can draw.
I believe this is DMPS. The programs that I and the team
Okay.
work with specifically. So then the question becomes, what are our next steps? Well, because our gold data tells us that we've been consistent with our achievement in literacy over the last several years, our focus needs to be on keeping going on that same course. We need to refine and strengthen our teacher skills, and really focus on rigorous instruction. This year, for the first year, our department was involved in the coaching cycles, the TLC coaching cycles, so our instructional coaches actually participated in district coaching training, and they held coaching cycles with our teachers. The focus of those cycles are to improve practice and on teacher growth. So we'll be continuing with that. The leadership team and myself, we will be conducting eye observations, so we will monitor for implementation. Are the strategies that teachers are using and teachers are learning in professional development, are they implementing those in their classrooms? And then I want to go back to our Hispanic subgroup just for a minute. In our department, we have an English language acquisition plan. We review that with teachers every year. This fall, we're going to do something just a little bit different. We're going to go more in depth with that to ensure that those strategies that are in that plan are in place in all of those classrooms. And we're not just going to hit it at the beginning of the year, we're going to revisit it throughout the year. And we will also be looking for those strategies in our eye observations. Second thing that we're planning on doing is during home visits, we're planning on providing all of our families, our non-English speaking families, with visual icons of our expectations. So it might be a board maker visual of sitting down or raising their hand, or it might be an icon of bathroom. To help our kids. And we're going to give those icons actually to the families at the home visit. Perfect opportunity because we'll have interpreters at those home visits that can help us communicate that information to try to make a stronger homeschool connection that way and address that subgroup, those lower scores in the Hispanic subgroup, or really any of our ELL students. The second key performance indicator that Susie talked about was in the area of math. Again, we use 2 assessment tools to monitor our progress. And again, the first is our GOLD, Teaching Strategies Gold. And when I met with you in April, we talked about how our math scores were lower, and we needed to really take a look at those and do something about that, and really focus our attention to those. And as you can see, our goal is 80%, and we really, over time, have not met that. I believe for multiracial, spring of 2016, that group met it, but that's the one. It's been consistently below our goal level. And I know as we talked in April, that's consistent nationwide, really, with math. So the second assessment that we use to monitor our progress is MAP. And again, when we talked in April, I reported our the fall MAP assessment. Again, MAP, like the FAST, is given to kindergarten students in the fall. This is the first year that kindergarten has been assessed with the MAP. What this tells us is that 36% of our students, of all students, were on track. Those are students that attended pre-K, as compared to 19.6% of students that did not attend. Our projection for the fall is going to be 37% on track. Now, this is because this is the first year and we don't have any trend data. This estimate is really kind of a loose estimate, so just know that because there is no trend data right now. So next steps in math. When I was here in April, we talked about certain steps that we were going to take, and several have already been taken. We've begun the process of exposing our students to the online assessment, use of a laptop and a mouse. The skills assessed on MAP, they have been identified and prioritized with the help of our curriculum department. Teachers have attended professional development and they are aware of these areas, and they've been provided instructional supports through our coaches and through our professional development to target those skills, and that's going to continue next year as well. And then we looked at our current curriculum, which is our HM pre-K curriculum and our hands-on math standards, and they are aligned to they are both aligned to the priority skills. So we looked at our data, and we also asked for teacher feedback in regard to, do teachers feel confident in teaching math? And it was overwhelmingly no. They did not feel that confidence as they do with literacy. So in turn, we are going to provide that next year. We're going to use the big ideas of early mathematics that's recommended by NACE. And we are inviting in a consultant, an outside consultant, Mary
Susie,
Erie.
would you tell us what NACE
Oh,
stands for?
yes. National Association for the Education of Young Children.
Thank you.
Sorry. And so we're going to bring Mary in 4 times next year. And I think this PD will be very powerful because part of it, we've included actually teacher video self-reflection as part of the professional development. And they can earn credit for taking it, but it's going to be mandatory part of the PD. In addition, we're going to continue to conduct those eye observations to make sure that any new strategies that we're learning in professional development, that they too will monitor those for implementation. All of our partners will be invited to the math professional development as well.
One of the nice things about all the assessment data that Susie and her teachers collect, it goes into Infinite Campus, and one of the ways that that helps us is that we have assessment information readily available for kindergarten students, or for kindergarten teachers. So when you think about students transitioning from preschool into kindergarten, one of the ways that we are able to assist with that is making sure that that data is readily available so that when students start at the beginning of the school year, teachers know exactly where they need to begin with them, and it eliminates the review time for children. One of the other things we do is we also offer Kindergarten Jumpstart. It's prior to the school year. It's a short little period of time, but it also gives teachers the ability to pick up where preschool has left off, review some of those basic literacy and math skills, as well as lay some of the routines and structures and expectations for students. And that has been a huge success as we've been transitioning students from preschool into kindergarten because it just allows for a smoother start to the school year. And the nicest thing about it is that staff can determine each student's kindergarten readiness in order to ensure adequate social, emotional, and academic support beginning the first day of school.
So the third KPI is the social emotional development. And for this area, we just have the gold assessment data. And so you can see that looking at our trends across time, our goal is 90%. And for all students, we have, for the most part, met that. This year we were slightly below, but it wasn't statistically significant. I can't say that. There was a minimal difference, again, between all students and African American students, but just a slight difference. Some of the things that we're doing in that area are We have implemented the multi-tiered behavior framework that the district is supporting. It's a systematic approach to improving school culture and really looking at how do we teach those routines and helping students be engaged in school. It's another indicator for us to use, looking at student progress with social emotional development. We're in our first year of that implementation, fully implementing that. This is the first year that we have collected behavior incident reports on our students and entered those into Infinite Campus. Part of our purpose in doing that is that we really need to have data to look at, to analyze, and see if we need to make adjustments in the environment, in our instruction. Are there times of day that are difficult, areas of the building that are difficult? So we really can dig deeper into that data by doing that. So using those behavior incident reports, we have collected what's called the core report. So looking at how many students have received 0 to 1 office referral, and that's that area in green. And you can see that 86% of our students received 0 to 1 behavior incident reports, which is really strong, speaking of our core. In the yellow, those 7% of students received 2 to 5 BIRs, and the red was 6% of students that received 6 or more BIRs throughout the year. So this tells us that our core is strong, and we need to continue with what we're doing for all students, but really targeting some of those students that are struggling. When we look at our data and break that down by race, ethnicity, you can see that our Hispanic population, we had 12% of the BIRs written were for Hispanic students, and we have 22% of our pre-K population that was Hispanic. For Asians, 6% of our BIRs and 13% of our population was Hispanic. Black or African American, 30% of our BIRs were written for Black African American students, and 19% of our students were Black or African American. For white students, 36% of BIRs and 36% of our students were white. And more than one race, 15% of our BIRs were written for more than one race and 8% of our population. So you can see that we have a couple areas that we need to target, looking at Black or African American students and students of more than one race, that we need to dig into a little deeper. We're hoping to reduce that. Our projection is to reduce that disproportionality by 1/3 for next year. This is our first year doing this, so this is kind of our baseline year, and seeing how we're doing with this. We do know that there are a handful of students who are experiencing severe behaviors, and that definitely impacts our data. So what are we going to do differently for those students? So looking at our next steps, one of the things that, as we looked at the BIRs that were entered this year, one of the things that we know we need to do with our teachers is really increase consistency. Some of the BIRs that were entered were for behaviors that perhaps weren't BIR worthy. I know that we looked at one, and it was for a student who didn't come to the carpet when he or she was supposed to, was redirected by the teacher, and then they came to the carpet. Probably not rising to the level that it needed to be written up as a BIR. So we really want to dig deeper into that and have more PD with our staff on when do you write a BIR, what rises to that level, so that we have more consistency with staff. We're going to continue our PD, analyzing data and modifying our practice. Implementing strategies, we have Tier 1 teams in all of our buildings that participate in the Tier 1 training with the district, and really looking at those restorative practices, and so teaching that to all of our staff. So using Flip It, classroom circles, peace tables, having calm down areas, and continuing work with solution kits so that students can learn to solve their own problems. Knowing that we're going to continue that cultural proficiency work, that's the plate that everything else sits on, and that makes a big difference in what we're doing and how we work with students. Looking at the instructional framework and lesson segments involving routine events and enacted on the spot. We're going to focus on those at the beginning of the year. And then again, monitoring for implementation, conducting those eye observations, making sure that things are being implemented with consistency across our programs.
So preschool, as they're monitoring behavior throughout the year, they're also able to upload any behavioral intervention plans into Infinite Campus. And again, how that benefits us when students are entering kindergarten is that is information that is accessible to schools. And so, for instance, if a student has a behavior intervention plan, but they did not receive early childhood services, this is provided and this is put, on one of the Infinite Campus tabs for school staff to access so that they know right away at the start of the school year what interventions and supports to put in place for an individual student. In addition to that, one of the things that we did this year is we worked with special education in regard to identifying students that are transitioning from preschool into kindergarten and set up some individual learning opportunities for them throughout the summer in order to increase the opportunities for them to not only be successful in school, but also make sure that they have the skills that they need as they enter into the school system. And so we're going to see what the impact of that has been after this summer and keep an eye on those students entering kindergarten and looking at, what are the pieces of that we can replicate for some of our regular ed preschool students that will be entering kindergarten as well.
Our fourth KPI is on parent engagement, and parent engagement is required of all of our different performance standards that we follow. Next year, we're fortunate that we're going to have 4 family engagement facilitators, and I do want to take just a minute. 2 of our folks are here today. Crystal Abbey, maybe wave, and Charlene Beatty. So 2 of our 4 were able to join us tonight, and they're a very important part of our team. Part of our parent engagement involves home visiting, which we do 1 to 2 times a year, depending on the performance standard. Every child receives a home visit before they start school, which is just key to helping get off on the right foot. We talk with parents, we learn from them about their child and how, what strengths they're going to bring to the classroom. At that time, we talk to them about ways they can be supportive in the home. We really feel like we have to be welcoming and supportive to our parents. Oftentimes, we're the first experience they've had with school, and we want them to know what an important part of the team that they are to help their child be successful. So not only do we do the home visits, but we do 2 conferences every year, as well as the K-12 students do. We have a monthly newsletter that goes home, and it's always connected to our learning or our goals for that month. It also involves having some activities that parents can do at home to make that homeschool connection and help strengthen their child's learning. Another activity we have is called Policy Committee that Head Start has, and each Head Start classroom chooses a representative to go to Policy Council. Cindy Ellsburn knows this well. She joins them monthly for those meetings. But that's an opportunity to help grow some parents' leadership skills because they elect officers as well in that group and learn about policy making and Robert's Rules of Orders, and again, how to help their child be successful. We also have something called PAC time, which is parents and child together time. That's about 20 minutes per week in every classroom, usually at the very beginning or the very end of the class time. Parents come in and the teacher directs some activity that could be related to literacy or mathematics or social emotional skills, and they do the activity together at school, and then it's something they can take home and do with their child at home, again, to strengthen that homeschool connection and their learning at home. We also have family events that focus on safety or just a variety of topics for parents that we do twice a year at each of our centers. Another great activity that's become really integral in our programs is called Coffee Connections. We started this 2 years ago, and it's just been so successful. We're quite happy with it. In Coffee Connections, we literally make coffee, and again, at the beginning of the morning session and the afternoon session, we invite parents to stop in for an informal chat or time to pick up resources. And each one of our Coffee and Connections, we have something on health and safety, we have something on social emotional, mental health, we have something on school readiness and community resources. And one example I just brought to show you because I had it laying on my desk today. We gave these out in May, and the nurse was talking about water safety and pool safety. And she talked about this with the parents, and whoever is responsible at that moment for watching the children in the pool is supposed to wear this so you know. And if I'm going to go run to the wherever, I can pass this on to Susie, who can then know she's in charge of watching those kids. So just to encourage that pool safety as we go. And so we always have things like that, again, that our family engagement facilitators work to bring in to our department so we can pass those things out. You can see in that first picture there that this particular day, the nurse was talking about dental health and talking about teeth and how to brush teeth, and we gave out toothbrushes for parents and children both, if they wanted them at this event. So families really have taken to this approach. We also, the social emotional talks about things we do in the classroom and things parents can do at home if they need help with social emotional issues with their child at home. Our social workers there, so they have the opportunity to talk with her and ask questions, which has been very positive. We bring in our kindergarten readiness goals, helping parents understand what children should know when they go to kindergarten, and we promote that. And then lots of resources that we provide, such as the pool safety. We've done ELL newcomer resources, tax clinic information, summer resources. So our family engagement facilitators do an awesome job of pulling together many, many resources. And over the course of this year, we had 2,881 parents sign in. So we probably had a few more than that, but that's just a phenomenal number of parents that stopped in, and we had the opportunity to engage with them and have them participate in the school program with their children. We also, out of this comes more formal gatherings. If we have a group of parents who may want to learn about CPR first aid, we can set up an individual class for those people who are interested in that. It could be that we do something with food and making healthy meals. Right now at Taylor, still continuing on as a parent support group. They started in about February as a result of Coffee and Connections, and when the school year ended, that group did not want to stop. So they still come and are meeting on Friday mornings to have that parent support. So that's just wonderful that that's been happening. We do have a calendar that we put together for the entire year that goes through each one of our strands and identifies what topics we're going to talk about at Coffee and Connections. Again, it's just been very, very successful. Some of our next steps for parent engagement are to continue extending that learning into the home through the pack time, Coffee and Connections. Some of our staff is doing yoga calm and trying to bring that to the home environment and show parents what that might look like that they might be able to do at home. One new thing we're going to do this year is a little different onboarding with parents during that first meeting at school when they come to set up their home visits. Again, we want to talk to them about what we do at school and look at those visuals. We want to give them materials on what to expect that first day and how do I leave my screaming child I can't get detached from my leg, to help them know what's going to happen, provide them information on bedtimes and bedtime routines to help them be successful on those first days of school. We also want to do a little more closely looking at our data from that. We do collect some data about pack time, for instance, but we want to be able to compile that a little more and disaggregate that and see which parents were reaching for that and what percentages and how we can maybe work to even encourage that attendance. We also do a tremendous amount of resource referrals for parents, and we collect that data for Head Start only at this point in time, and next year we want to do that for all of our programs and monitor not only what we've offered to them, but follow up with them to see what resources they may have used and to see what we're being successful in that way. So really a pretty good variety of activities that we do for parent engagement, and we've been very successful.
And one of the things that will be new this summer for parents is we are starting online registration for families, for our pre-K families, and creating parent portals, collecting any of the necessary paperwork, birth certificate, immunizations, all of those things. We've worked very closely with our assessment team in order to get that up and running. And one of the ways that this is going to benefit, families that will be leaving preschool and entering kindergarten is it reduces the amount of paperwork and items that they need to gather and have ready, because it'll already be in the system and through the online registration process. And so that way they can spend more time learning about their new school environment, connecting with their teacher, following up on any type of supports that a student, their child may need. So we're hoping that that creates a smoother transition for families moving forward as well. So we're excited to get that started. Any questions for the preschool team.
Ms. Anderson?
Sorry, I would have asked this earlier. So in the beginning, when you were talking about refining and strengthening teaching skills, and you said you would have operations, is that kind of like a walkthrough or?
It's using the Marzano instructional framework template or walkthrough. And that's what we've been focusing on all last year and will be again in this year in professional development in addition to math. What the framework really does, it points out, it highlights strategies that are strategies that can be used pre-K through 12. And they're research-based best practice.
So
The
how
nice
many
part
of those,
about
though?
it is there's teacher evidence in there, and there's also student evidence. So if we know that research says these are good things to have in place, you can really help a teacher pinpoint specifically maybe what are the things that are already in place, and then that, that next step to continue to further along their work in a particular strategy. And so it gives a good roadmap for that as well.
How many walkthroughs does a teacher have in 1 year? Official walkthroughs or?
I don't know that there's an official number. What we're going to try to do is at least one between every PD session. And then that will be in addition to the evaluation observations we already do.
So if they're up for,
Evaluation then will be in there.
right.
Right. And if we're seeing, so if we have professional development in September and then again in October, and let's say we're focusing on routine events and lesson segments on the spot, so it's student engagement, and we offered that and we had professional development, and that's what we're going to go in and look for between those two times.
Right. And
If we see it, that's great. If not, then we may be in there more often, but we will be in there.
Just like normal, if they're up for evaluation officially, but then.
Well, for
if not-
observations, that can vary depending on the teacher. There may be some that, through their learning have really taken off and they're, already implementing what needs to take place in the classroom, showing good results with students. They may not have as many, frequent touches as someone else that maybe might want or need some additional support, but really it's just all about continuous growth, improvement, providing support where needed.
Okay.
In addition to the three of us, we have a Head Start coordinator, Melissa Leon, and she will be conducting eye observations, and then 2 instructional coaches that will be in working with the teachers on the Marzano instructional framework during their coaching cycles.
Okay, I just had maybe one more. And the icons for Hispanic students, how will you go about that? Because I feel like they could potentially demean or they could have a stigma or feel.
Using
kind of like-
visuals
I think
is
if,
such a.
if I'm correct, that was talked about when referencing the Hispanic data, but I think it's really specific to ELL
Correct.
students.
Using visuals is such a huge part of any early childhood classroom because it teaches vocabulary and it teaches that routine. And so providing those to the parents, if they want them, we're going to have that available to them. And honestly, even if they speak English, if they want them at home to, let's say, set up a schedule for their child or provide that routine and go over that, they'll be available for all parents.
And it's just one way also to kind of front load information for families and for students, to set them up for success.
But they'll have a choice, right?
Sure.
So if they don't feel comfortable or.
Absolutely.
I just guess I would be afraid or just a little, I don't know what the wording is, but this might make them feel less than their peers potentially. Maybe. But maybe not. If you're offering it to everyone, then.
And the thing I think that's important is those are the same visuals they see in every classroom.
Okay,
So it's
yeah, but-
very familiar to the kids because it doesn't matter which classroom you're in, all the classrooms use those same visuals for our schedules, for making transitions, for reminders. using point prompts.
Okay.
So those visuals, they'll see them every day in the classroom, so it wouldn't be foreign
Okay.
to them.
That's better, okay. And I think parent engagement, that's like you're hitting it out of the park. That's awesome.
Do an outstanding job.
Yep.
Mr. Barron?
Thank you. Jumping off of what Heather was asking about at the end there. So, how do we know that language is a barrier for the Latino preschool students that we're bringing in? I mean, besides the fast literacy data, how do we know that? I mean, the implication is that it's a population that's most likely to speak a different language in the home. And you mentioned ELL in your most recent comments. At what point are we identifying ELL?
Okay, we cannot identify ELL at the preschool level, but what we do is they do have all students, we have families fill out the home language survey. So from there, we compile that, and that goes into Infinite Campus. So then at our first Meet the Teacher parent orientation, we take that data and we hire interpreters. So, and it's not for this family specifically or this family. We know according to our data that, let's say that we have 10 Spanish-speaking families. So then we bring in the interpreters, and if they need that assistance, then they're there for them.
Okay.
Okay, and so then we do, the interpreters are very, very helpful in communicating and trying to determine, do they need that extra assistance?
It seems like if you look at, I mean, the takeaway for me in looking at the data comparing kindergarten students with no preschool or outside of our preschool network at least, and those within, is there's still a huge access problem and access to quality preschool. I know funding is at the root of a lot of this, but is there anything that we can be aware of or attuned to that could begin to address the access problem that is evident in these numbers?
Well, at Mitchell, that's where our largest waiting list is. But without additional funding, and we have room for possibly one more classroom there of 40 students, but without additional funding, we can't add additional staff.
A 40-student classroom?
Well, 20 in the morning and 20 in the afternoon,
Okay.
half day.
Yeah.
But without additional funding, we cannot add additional staff.
What's that waiting list look like? I mean, is it 40 students long, or is it longer than that?
At Mitchell, it's longer than that. We are working with our partners. So, for example, Head Start, Drake University Head Start, they are actually opening 2 preschool classrooms at Southridge Mall in hopes that that will help our waiting list. We're always looking for new partners. Right now, we have 13 community partners, and some have grown over time to add more classroom and more classrooms and students. And I'm actually working with one additional right now. I don't know that we'll have that in place by this fall, but we're looking at the following year. So I'm always trying to reach out to more community partners, really in our core area where our kids are in the most need.
We also have staff at the Welcome Center that's specifically for early childhood, and they maintain our waiting lists, and so they know, for instance, at Taylor, if we have 10 on the waiting list and one leaves, they can put one in, and they kind of just do that constantly, so we're trying to get as many kids in as we can.
And then they monitor enrollment over time, and some of the things that Susie's and her team have had to do in the past is based on where the waiting list is or the greatest need. Sometimes, we shift resources and staffing in order to address that need, but I would say probably most recently it's pretty much stabilized, and we have a solid idea of where the biggest needs are. So we haven't had to make that movement as much.
And then just kind of switching gears, it struck me to a certain extent that it seems like perhaps our professional development opportunities or strategies are not the same at the pre-K level as they are at the K-12 level. There's some interventions that were mentioned, bringing in MTSS, and that seemed to me like they're things that we've heard were being presented at the K-12 level over the last year or two, and they sound newer at the pre-K level. Are we on par with PD with our preschool teachers as much as we are with the rest of our teaching workforce?
Actually, I'll make a couple of observations on that, because I don't know I can give a complete concrete answer. But number one, over the last 3 years, I would say, especially the last 2, we've really worked hard at, and this is a team effort here, of aligning what we're doing at early childhood with the rest of our system and not acting like it's kind of a system in and of itself. So we've made a lot of progress there. You referenced the multi-tiered system of supports, but also the Marzano framework, and then Angela talked about the tier 1 behavior supports. So we are doing a lot of things consistently that way that not only helps develop staff more consistently, but maybe more importantly, gives us better information on our students when they enter the system as kindergartners. So as Susie said, we can eliminate wasted time on things that the students don't need and dig into exactly what the right entry point is. Well, I'll say regarding the opportunities for staff, there are not as many opportunities for our staff professional development in some ways as there are for the K-12 teachers, but in some ways it is more targeted and more directly aligned with what they're doing day to day and in response to the data. And I don't know if you want to talk about how you guys maybe talk about the typical week and what the PD looks like because of the uniqueness of the schedule. Wednesdays look a little bit different for our pre-K than they do. So it's kind of hard to say apples to apples, but maybe you can describe that a little bit, Susie.
It really is. We attend 4 days a week, some half day, some full day. Reason that we do that is because with our performance standards, our Head Start performance standards, our statewide voluntary preschool performance standards, what are called QPPS, Quality Preschool Program Standards, and NACE standards, the amount of professional development that is required of preschool teachers is probably doubled of what it is for K-12. For example, all of our teachers have to be certified in first aid and CPR. That's, no one else in the district does. Certain classrooms have to take 10 hours of professional development, what's called the essentials training. No one else in the district does. So there are very specific requirements. So those Wednesdays, we use that time to provide all of that professional development. And then I do believe we have made great strides aligning district preschool initiatives and district initiatives. I think you could ask any preschool teacher and they would tell you the 4 district initiatives because we're doing the same thing. We're doing it right along with. I think that as far as Marzano's instructional framework, we have been doing videos of the specific strategies. But how do they look at preschool? We've had overwhelmingly positive feedback from teachers that this has been the best year of professional development ever because they've been able to watch videos of their colleagues putting it into place. As far as MTSS, Christy Preddy-Franzek, who is from Kent State University, she spent the last 2 years with us working on MTSS. Cultural proficiency, some of the training that we did this year was the most moving and most impactful PD that we provided our teachers, and I think they would tell you that.
Our leadership team attends all of the professional development that the district leadership teams attend, and so then we take that back to our staff as well to stay up to date with those things.
Thank you.
So we make sure that we include preschool in all of the training, all of our, times that leadership teams meet and building principles. And so they're a part of all of that planning right along with us, and most recently joined us for our Leadership Institute.
Great, I appreciate that. Only other point I'll make is I'll be watching this from a different seat this year with my 4-year-old entering the preschool program. So.
That'll be great.
Ms. Langford?
Sorry, can you all hear me? You touched on this, Rob. How many students total do we have enrolled in our preschool programs, and then how many are on a waiting list? Do we have those numbers?
Over
Or
the
a
years, and
estimate
it's
of
been pretty consistent. We have approximately 2,000 students, but that would include all of our partner sites as well, okay? And we start out with a couple hundred on our waiting list. But again, our enrollment office does a really great job of working with our partners to see if they have openings, if we can plug kids in there based on what the parent needs.
And how does that compare to how many students we have coming in for kindergarten?
About half.
About half, okay. I know it's just one of those things you have to keep hearing, or I have to keep hearing.
In fact, I just got the number from Vicki Bennett a couple weeks ago, and I think it was like 49-point-some%. So it's about half of our kindergarten students attended pre-K.
Are there any initiatives that you're aware of in the community, either from the school district or just that you're aware that community partners are doing in terms of what about those other 50% of students who aren't engaged in preschool? Do we know reasons typically why students aren't, or has there been any?
Well,
A big one is, transportation, but sometimes it's a little too simply defined as transportation. What it really boils down to for a lot of our families is, in order to provide the transportation for a half-day program, which is all the funding we can afford to provide for our students, you really you're doubling the transportation. So if you dropped your son off at preschool in the morning, and then you have to come pick him up midday, and then take him to daycare, presumably, and pay for that, sometimes at the same rate as whether it's full day or half day, and then back to work, and then back to daycare, it just becomes really a non-possibility for many of our families.
You have to make it plain for me, as I am not a mother at this point. Thank you, that's helpful. And then I was curious, what is being assessed when we're looking at social emotional development on that gold assessment?
Well, the different areas, go ahead, Angie.
Some of the different areas are self-regulation, how they interact with peers, interactions with adults, ability to follow directions.
I think those are the four.
Okay. And then I did want to talk about the BIRs based on demographics, on different racial demographics. Are there trends that you're seeing in terms of behaviors that are being, you mentioned that we've noticed that some of our students are being referred for things that they probably shouldn't be. Are there trends?
We really don't have any trend data, as this was our first year of doing it. We hadn't entered BIRs before this year. So that's part of what we'll be looking at next year, as we can see, and as we help our staff, again, to know what do we really need to enter a BIR on, and what is part of just teaching 4-year-olds how to act in school.
And what is a BIR?
It stands for Behavior Incident Report, so it's writing up a report. It's kind of like an office referral for school age. We don't necessarily call it an office referral. They don't go to the office, but it's just documenting that behavior incident.
And then what are the typical responses or consequences if a student has a BIR?
There aren't necessarily consequences. It's more, how do we resolve that situation? So it might just be talking with the child, redirecting them, helping them to, if they're upset, helping them to resolve their feelings. It may be parent contact, letting the parent know, and we're working with staff to be sure that parents are always knowing when those incidents happen. So it's more just, how do we teach the students that behavior piece is our response. So there isn't a consequence like in-school suspension or detention.
Being sent home for the day or anything like that. We're not calling parents to say, come pick up your child.
No.
Okay, that's helpful.
Yeah.
I think one of the things that was most alarming when I just initially looked at this, when we see those disparities, they're so young. We're talking about 3 and 4-year-olds.
Right.
So what's our response to
teach them.
Right, and our response is to teach them how they're supposed to act in school and how they handle their feelings.
I think it will be interesting to see, are we going to track that trend data for what types of behavior instances we're seeing at this level?
Yes.
Because I mean, I just wouldn't be surprised at every level we're always seeing this kind of the same trends. There's that subjective piece where, you know, oftentimes that's where we see like the referrals skyrocket around like certain behaviors.
But that's one of the benefits of putting it into Infinite Campus, at least for the teacher, because some behaviors are probably very low level, but what you're able to do is identify over time if there is a pattern of behavior so that you're able to provide a more targeted, you know, intervention or support for a student in order to be more successful in school. So I think of it more as just like a log of information that you can refer back to. You have it all in one spot, and that you're able to take a look at, you know, what is it that I'm consistently seeing, or is this just kind of a one-time, you know, event or incident with the student?
We did set some goals at our schools last year, more informally, I guess, because it was new, but one of the things we can track is the time of day or the activity. So is it happening at recess, or is it happening during a transition from one activity to the other? So at McKee, for instance, during 1 month, we found that a high percentage of the BIRs were happening during transitions times, moving from one activity to the next. So we set a goal with the staff, and we did some small informal PD with staff to talk about what do we do during transitions, how can we do that differently, how can we teach the kids the transition to hopefully make an impact for the next month, and we did see some good results from that.
Final question / point maybe. So starting in kindergarten, the approach changes. Am I correct? Starting in kindergarten, we can start to see more of those consequences for behavior. We're looking at detentions, we're looking at out-of-school suspensions, that sort of response oftentimes to behaviors once we start in our K through 12 system.
Well, how we document them as I don't remember which of you said. I think Angela said these are intentionally called behavior incident reports and not office referrals, because office referrals does, as you're suggesting, imply there's a consequence. And really what we're trying to do is shift our whole system in two ways. Number one, let's start paying closer attention earlier so that we can make modifications in our adult behavior to have better outcomes for our students. And number two, as I think you've heard Jake Troja say in a prior report this year, what we're trying to do is take a closer look at how we're responding and what do we need to change in the system, so that we're not thinking of it in terms of a consequence for students, but a more effective system so that we don't have those, have that disproportionate outcomes. But you're right, there is a transition once they get into the K-12 where we look at it differently. But again, if you remember I think it was last year's treatment of students report, we really make it a big shift in our elementary to much like pre-K did this year. We're intentionally tracking more data so that we're more cognizant of what we're doing, and we're not just making hunch-based decisions about how we're responding to student behavior, but we actually have some real data to look at so that we can make adjustments in our system.
Yeah, I was going to say.
So that we're creating conditions where students can be successful rather than viewing it as the student not responding to what we've put in front of them.
I think, and that's part of the story that we need to be telling, and that we also need to be moving towards, right? Because the difference between like a 3 or 4-year-old and a 5 or 6 or 7-year-old isn't, I mean, we're still talking about children, and I'm not saying there shouldn't be consequences for behavior. We're teaching that, but if we can move from a mode of labeling a child as deviant or bad or that's the only two labels I can think of right now at such an early age, and focus on teaching.
Yeah, right.
I think that's what we need to be doing. So I'm excited to hear that's the approach we're taking with our preschoolers.
Ms. Boson.
When we're talking about the 30 partners, how do we work with them as far as the professional development, and how do they have as seamless as what we have within our own program, our own buildings? Seamless transition of...
As a partner, or as the fiscal agent, we are required by performance standards to invite and provide professional development, invite them to all of that. Now, so for example, we do have several partners that come, but then there are several partners that, for example, the diocese, they do their own PD. They always check it out with me, and they always say, what do you think? And in fact, one of our former early childhood special education consultants provide all their PD. We have partners that are NACE accredited, the National Education, or National Association for the Education of Young Children, and so they, and if they are NACE accredited, I'm very confident that their professional development is focused on the NACE standards. We have partners that are project-based approaches, which we don't use the project-based approach, but they do, and in talking with them, they bring in national speakers as well in that area. So I'm confident that our partners are all involved in high-quality professional development, and then several actually come to our PD as well. And that's part of our 28E agreement.
Okay, so I just wondered how that went.
Yes.
And they are not assigned like an Infinite Campus number, only the kids
Yes,
in our
they
building?
are.
They are, okay, just wanted to make sure. Okay.
And back to Terry's question, the gold data, it was just DMPS. I do know that. The FAST and the MAP, that's what I'm going to need to check on, because when you do FAST and MAP, you're looking at kindergartners, and if they attended preschool, I don't know which preschools were included there, but I can find that out for you.
Great.
And then each of our partners also gets an individual gold report on their fall, winter, and spring results. And that goes directly to the directors so that they can use their own data for their specific site to adjust their instruction.
Okay. I guess the one last thing, I think it's still pretty obvious looking at the scores of the kids who don't have preschool, that the goals should still be there, that preschool is a pretty important item for the legislative agenda. Mm-hmm. And really need to keep pushing that and expanding that.
Other questions from the board? I did have one other quick question. So when we say on the data, no preschool versus DMPS preschool, does that mean clearly those students have no preschool, or we have no record that they have no preschool? So they could be going.
Sure.
We just don't have a record of that.
Correct. The parents, struggle sometimes when they're answering the questions on Infinite Campus, because let's say you have a child that attends Head Start, they'll mark that down as no preschool because they said, well, it's not, it's Head Start. So we've reworded the actual registration form, the kindergarten registration, online registration, to include that these are the preschools we're talking about.
Okay. Any other questions? Thank you. Our next item is item number E4, monitoring report on elementary literacy. As they're coming up, I'll ask the superintendent to introduce the item.
Okay, so this is the third in a series on elementary reading, responsive to Board Policy 4.1.1, student expectations, but this is one of the 4 priority areas that the board asked us to focus on this year. Again, this is not a monitoring report that gets approved because it's not responsive to a specific policy. So we have reported out on other monitoring reports where relative to literacy, where the board has already approved those. The approach in this presentation is to be attempt to be more narrative in tone and content. There is data for sure, but we are making the assumption that the data that's included in the broader report, also in your board packets, is supplementary to this. And so this is meant to be really more of a higher level overview that tells a more meaningful picture of the health of the system, where our successes are, and how we're going to respond to what we see as challenges. Okay. So I'll turn it over to Noelle and Susie and Carlene, our guest and partner from Heartland AEA.
You just did. So all right, we'll jump in. Good evening, Board. Just a reminder, as that's already included in your report, we will be reporting on the 4 KPIs, but actually our discussion will be going a little bit deeper. As we've peeled back some of the data, as we've looked at these KPIs, more questions arise and more data gets examined. So tonight, as Tom said, we're going to attempt to kind of give you our thoughts and perceptions on the data, knowing that as we kind of peel back the layers, there's a lot of hypotheses being made, and so we have the plans to go a little bit deeper before we're confident in validating any of those hypotheses. But we're certainly going to discuss kind of what we're noticing at this time and what our thoughts are. So we'll be looking at fall to spring benchmark on FAST grades K through 3. As a reminder, that's a screener, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. All K-3 students give it, and we're in our second and third year of administering that assessment. So now we have some nice trend data. So even though trend is not actually a KPI, I think it actually points to system improvement more than just looking at a single year. So we're certainly going to talk about that. We'll also be looking at MAP briefly, and that's really just the on track. We can say in second grade whether or not a student is on track for college and career readiness per those cut points. We'll be looking at the MAP again, the growth. The MAP assessment is really starting to change and shift our culture in Des Moines as to how we define success. And I think that's an important shift and one that Dr. Ahart has invested in. And so it's really about not just who are our highest performing schools. We celebrate that certainly, but it's interesting as we're starting to shake this out, it's not always our highest performing schools who are doing the best job of growing
I just
kids.
want to just make some wordsmithing.
Okay.
Our highest achieving aren't necessarily our highest performing.
Exactly. That's what I'm trying to say. Thank you.
I'm obviously need to keep working on
Highest
messaging
achieving,
internally.
it's not always the best scores that indicate whether or not kids are actually growing in that environment. So as we shift this culture to looking at growth, we're noticing that some of our schools who have struggled on the test scores are actually outperforming other schools when we actually look at growth as the indicator of success. So we'll talk more about that. Thank you, Tom. So looking at our FAST data, before we get into this, I want to just attempt to provide what we think is a high-level synthesis. So we've presented you with a lot of data. It can be overwhelming, kind of data-rich, information-poor in some cases. So our big picture takeaways and what our discussions have really centered around is first of all our successes. So when we think about where we're really proud and where we're seeing true system improvement is in grades kindergarten, second, and third. So we have, even though we have trend data across the board that shows that we're looking at system improvement, we define system improvement as when we see not just all kids growing, but we start to see gaps closing in our subgroups. So looking at kindergarten, certainly, and we'll get into that, our kindergarten is a huge celebration. And after sitting through our preschool report, I think it's obvious as to why one of the reasons our kindergartners are performing so much better over time is because the preschool experience that they're getting is so much richer and they're sending kids to us better prepared. So we certainly thank our preschool partners for that. So those are certainly celebrations. The other major celebration that I think you may have already noticed as you dug into the data is that we're noticing that our African American subgroup is actually responding better than any of our other subgroups. So we're seeing across the board that African Americans are closing in on some of those gaps, and I think that points to the intentional effort that has been made with a focus on Black males and really raising the awareness of everyone in the system that this is something that we need to attend to very seriously. Concerns for us, high-level concerns. We're not quite sure what's happening in first grade right now. While the 3-year trend is up, we're alarmed that first grade went down this year, and actually went down pretty significantly. So we're going to dig into that a little bit. The other area of concern for us is that our special education, our students receiving special education services are the most discrepant, and the arrows are not going in the right direction. So that's another area that we have to do further study and further digging, and we've partnered certainly with our special ed folks for more in-depth analysis there. So just a reminder before we start talking FAST, the FAST assessment is given to everyone, but when we talk about FAST, we don't want to talk about proficiency. We don't want to say that this percentage of kids are proficient, because it's not measuring proficiency, it's measuring at-riskness. So its job is to generously identify students who might be at risk for not being on track by third grade. So we're going to avoid those words of proficient, but you're going to hear meeting benchmark. And so by meeting benchmark, we're saying that they're not at risk. And so it's also important to know that this benchmark changes throughout the year. So it's all based on norms. So when we administer the assessment in the fall, the benchmark lives here. When we administer it in the winter, the benchmark goes up. And when we administer it in the spring, it goes up again. And so when you see a rise or a decline in scores, this is an important context, because if it goes down, it doesn't necessarily mean kids are getting worse. It means they're failing to keep up with the benchmark. And on the flip side, when that number goes up, it means that we're actually closing in on a gap. We're seeing some acceleration. And so that's an important notation as you kind of consume this data. So at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Carlene. She's going to talk about kind of that next layer beyond what was present in your report, and talk about some notable trends that we think are worthy of discussion.
So we know that you studied the report, but we just wanted to build a little bit more context for those notable trends. So we put a couple of visuals together to help point that forward. So if you look on this slide, you'll notice, as Noelle said, we have a lot of celebrations in kindergarten. And you can see that we made good improvement over the 3-year trend. And all of the subgroups have made progress in a positive direction, which especially with our students receiving free and reduced lunches, with our ELL, our African American and Asian students, because they are making the kind of gains that will really get us to moving toward closing that achievement gap. And you can see with 64% of our kindergartners meeting the benchmark this spring, we are projecting for next spring to be at 70%. And one of the things that I looked at today is the state actually in the spring was at 69%. So we're projecting even a higher goal for our students, which is, I think, reachable compared to when we look at our data. And I think that speaks a lot to the system work that we have done and how our students are responding. So that's exciting. If you look at this table, this is our kindergarten data, and this is within year, meaning fall to spring. And you can notice that we've had significant gains from fall to spring in all of our subgroups except for special ed.
I don't know the answer to that. Hopefully they can correct that if possible. Go ahead.
Okay. And the next slide then indicates a really big celebration in the fact that in our students that were meeting benchmark in winter, 86.89% of them in the spring are still meeting benchmark, and the benchmark has changed. It's gotten higher and more difficult. So once we get our students meeting that benchmark, we're keeping them there. So that's another indicator of good core instruction. So on the next slide, this kind of just wraps up the positive trends that we're noticing, and that is, a 3-year trend of improvement. All subgroups are improving. Particularly those groups that we mentioned are closing that gap. Almost 87% of the students who met that spring benchmark or winter benchmark are still meeting that benchmark in the spring. And then the area of concern that we mentioned, of course, is the special ed data. So as we move to first grade, you can see again over that 3-year trend, we had a lot of positive gains with all students making good progress. We did, in the area of special education and multiracial students, we are not seeing the kind of significant gains that we would want to see, like our African American and Asian students, which made great gains in their progress toward closing that achievement gap. We have set our projection for 60% of our first graders to make meeting benchmark next spring. This is the graph that causes us the most concern, as Noah had mentioned. When we look from fall to winter, or to spring, we notice that we lost ground in every subgroup, including all of our students. And as Noel kind of indicated, keep in mind, I think one of the things is we're seeing good outcomes out of kindergarten, and that translates to that fall first grade data. And it's not that the students went backwards. Our instruction probably wasn't as robust as we needed it to keep them meeting the benchmark across the year. So this is the area that we really want to dig in. We have some hypotheses around that, but this is an area that we really want to dig a little bit deeper in. I was at Heartland this afternoon talking to some folks there, and this mirrors the state. So that's also intriguing to us as Heartland agency and the state, is what is happening across the state in first grade in regard to it's not comforting to know that, but we're not alone in our data looking like this. Once again, another celebration though, once we get those first graders meeting that benchmark, we kept 90% of them, over 90% of them meeting the benchmark in the spring. So the more we can get those kids meeting the benchmark, the better we are at keeping them going. So I think in review again, our first grade notable trends, you can see again, and even though we saw that within year decline, overall the 3 years, we've seen nearly a 6% gain, seen some really good things, improvement in our subgroups, except for special ed and multiracial, and 90% of our kindergartners or first graders are staying in that meeting that benchmark. Again, a concern is that subgroup with special ed, ELL, and multiracial. When we move to second grade, again, we see nice gains across the 3 years with all of our subgroups, noting that even at second grade, special ed made some good gains. So this is the only grade level that we didn't see that decline. We did see some good results in African American, Asian, and Hispanic students, and we have set a projection of 55% at the second grade level. When we looked within year, this is the fall to spring. This is where at second grade, our special ed students didn't make as much progress as we would like to see, as well as our multiracial group. At second grade, once again, this is very consistent. If they are meeting the benchmark in the winter, we're able to keep them meeting that benchmark in the spring. So our students that are on target are really responding well to the core instruction that they're receiving. And this is again a summary sort of what those visuals tell you. We are again seeing a trend for all students increasing across time. All subgroups are improving. Following groups, special ed, African American, Asian, and Hispanic students are making the best progress in closing that gap. And we're keeping over 90% of the students on target. And we need to have special concerns around special ed and multiracial. Third grade is very similar in making those kinds of good growth, except for ELL. This is the first time that subgroup over the 3-year trend, it'd just be 2 years at second and third grade. We did see a slight decline of 5% of the students. We were at a total of 52% meeting the benchmark, and we've set our projection at 55% for the spring of 2018. When we look at our third grade fall to spring data, I think one of the things that, again, is really impressive is the growth that the African American students are making across the year. We're really closing the gap significantly, and we were at 52% of our students meeting benchmark. When you look at the remaining students that are meeting the benchmark in third grade, we even get a higher percentage that we retain from winter to spring. And again, very similar, the two-year trend, we did see a slight increase of 2%. All subgroups are improving except for ELL. We're making some good progress in closing that achievement gap for our African Americans, which has been across all of the grade levels, our Asian and multiracial students, and over 91% of our students are staying on benchmark. We did see a slight decrease in our ELL students at the third grade level.
So we're not going to spend time talking about the tiered system of supports that have been put in place, but kind of from a high-level overview, we have developed a team, kind of a task force, and this team is made up of people who have literacy expertise, and more importantly, we've partnered with Heartland as well as our Office of Schools partners, directors, to really identify some schools that we know are in need of some intensive and some targeted support, and then how do we go out into the field, help them identify where are their areas of concern, and then most importantly, help them identify some plans and some actions and then support them in removing barriers. I know the directors have been instrumental in coaching principals. So really, as we've provided these supports, we want to monitor this, and this is a big deal for us for two reasons. One, we just want to know that is the treatment improving outcomes for kids. That's number one. But secondly, are the practices that we're working with these schools on, are they yielding some promising results that we could then consider scaling on a much larger scale? And so we are interested in seeing how those schools perform this year. So again, this was our first year in kind of this tiered system, but this is looking at our 5 most intensive schools that have been identified because we had significant concerns about how their students were performing, and they had significant concerns. So looking across the board, of the 5 schools, 3 out of those 5 responded positively to that treatment. It was interesting. We provided them additional training on the problem-solving process, which means they dig into their data. It might take a full day. They start to identify root cause. They do a root cause analysis and then verify that hypothesis and then put actions into place. What we found was, and I guess this maybe isn't surprising, it surprised me that while we were there to provide literacy support, what we found was a lot of the schools who weren't responding have much more significant issues that they were dealing with that go far beyond literacy. And so that's where our partnership with Office of Schools has been instrumental. So principals getting additional support. We've had to tackle the beliefs and the efficacy piece of the adults. There has been instance where we're not sure the adults always believe kids can learn at high levels. And so this isn't about going in and providing literacy instruction. This was about tackling a lot of those culture and climate issues that we knew were there, but really it surfaced through this process. And so like I said, our Office of Schools team has been super instrumental in helping support those schools, and they'll stay in this cohort next year. We're not letting, with the exception of one school, we're not letting them go. So looking at our targeted support, so they had less intensive support than that last group of schools, but there are 5 additional schools, a lot of data coaching, on-site support from the early literacy team, kind of a thought partner. And all but one school responded pretty positively. We're really excited about school 3 and 5. School 4 was interesting. They kind of bucked the support initially. They were pretty independent, didn't really like the idea of having folks come in and support. At mid-year, their data went crazy. It was really, really positive. So we were excited and we thought, you know what, they're hitting it out of the park, leave them alone. They don't need us. They've got it going in the right direction. And then we didn't see that same trend continue in the spring. So we have to circle back with that group. But I think what we've learned through this process is as we identify the needs, and every school, as they engaged in the problem-solving process, identified different root causes for why their achievement wasn't where they wanted it to be. which isn't surprising, but it does point to systems level challenges of we can't have a one-size-fits-all solution. We have to help schools identify what are our barriers, and then we have to be prepared to deploy supports to help them get past those barriers. So we did learn a few things through this process and have refined it for next year. This kind of circles back to my initial comment, and I fumbled a little bit, and Dr. Ahart was more eloquent than I. But when we look at...
Is this being recorded? Sure.
Always. When we look at how we define success of a school, we don't want to just look at student achievement. So what this does is we said of the elementary schools, how much growth or regression are they making? So what this pie represents is you'll see the dark green is 15, and that's 15 schools contributed positively of their growth was more than 5%. So those we would say are doing the best. They're the highest performing as far as growing kids. The lighter green is 10 schools. 10 of our schools were in that 0.01 to 5% growth, and this is K3 collapsed data, fall to spring. Then we look at how many schools are actually bringing the average down, for lack of a better term. And so 8 of our schools had a negative, or a 0 to a negative 5% decline. And then the red zone, 7 of our schools had that negative 5% or more. And so the reason this was important is as we looked at some of our schools, some of the schools that were following in the red zone were actually some of our highest achievement. So that causes us to circle back with some of those schools and say, even though you're above 80%, which is what we want to see, are we growing kids? And so the conversation changes. And so that's the work that's ahead of us. And again, we can have those conversations with FAST, but MAP is really one too to spotlight who's growing and who's maybe stagnant.
The other thing to note is that of the 15 in the dark green, 5 of those were from the intensive and targeted schools. So they were our kind of lowest performing. They're making the most
Lowest
growth.
student achievement.
Yes.
Most achieving.
Yeah. So, you would sort of think they would be down in the red and the orange, but they actually, a third of them were those targeted and intensive schools that brought up the growth.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so looking at MAP, we're just going to talk more about the growth, even though the college and career readiness cut points are certainly important. And that actually is a celebration. Is for second grade, we saw a really surprising trend that we increased 6% of the kids kind of crossing the line. So if we have a benchmark that said these kids have mastered this content, we saw 6% more kids cross that line. And our subgroups, certainly in second grade, made gains, all subgroups from fall to spring. So that's absolutely a celebration. Interestingly, though, our growth is not where we want it to be. I thought it would be the opposite if I could predict it. I was predicting our growth would be really high, but we would continue to struggle with the number of students actually crossing that proficiency line. So right now in second and third grades, we're below the expected percentage. We're about 45% of our students are meeting their individualized growth target. Nationally, the norm is set at 50. We'd like to see gaps closing at 60. So that tells you about how far away we are from where we'd like to be. And then all of our subgroups, except for our white students in second grade, are performing below our expectations and below where the national expectations would be. Our most discrepant subgroup is special education.
Okay. Board member questions. Ms. Langford.
Because I'm so excited. I know that we have talked about a few times at the board table what we were looking for in terms of the narrative that we tell. And for me, personally, I can't speak for all of our board members. This is what I needed. This is what was helpful, right? It's one thing to look at all the data, right? And it's a lot if you're not in that world every day. And of course, we pour through those reports, but this high-level summary with an honest and transparent picture of what we're doing well and where our issues are, this was extremely helpful, and this was great. So thank you for taking the time to do that, and I'm sure the public also has an easier time digesting this than sometimes what all of those numbers and reports mean. So thank you for that. One of my big picture questions is, knowing that we're going into a time of, we're just not getting the money that we need from the state, right? We all know, we've talked about it, that it's going to impact us here in our district. So I'm wondering, on a high level, what do our financial resources go to in our efforts, particularly around our K-3 reading?
I'll take this one, and you guys can fill in where I'm missing it. I'm not going to. These guys might be able to hit more specifically the K-3, but generally speaking, about 40% of the resources that we spend on teaching staff are not classroom teachers. They're folks that are providing additional Tier 2 and Tier 3 supports for our students. And so one of the most exciting things for me about this data is there's very strong indications that the system's getting stronger, and I'm defining that by how many or what percentage of our students are having most of their instructional needs met in the regular classroom with their primary classroom teacher. Because if we can do that more effectively, we'll have to provide fewer of the Tier 2, which are more intensive from a fiscal perspective, are more intensive, and Tier 1, which is really expensive, if you will, to provide. So we can still provide those supports. What our goal is to have the need to provide those intensive and really intensive supports to a much smaller percentage of our students.
So right now, the majority of our funding, if we had to focus within our K-3 reading initiatives, is around the extra additional support staff.
Well, it would be around the core staff first, and then that additional support staff,
Core staff meaning teachers.
Core staff meaning classroom teachers, who like if you're a third grade teacher, you have your group of 20 or 25 students, and then we have other teachers who are supporting your efforts by providing additional ELL supports or special education supports or literacy tutoring, sometimes in the classroom at the same time, and Title I supports.
Literacy tutoring. Because all of those things are helping. The growth that we're seeing is a result of a lot of the things that we're funding, and those are some of the things that we're funding that are making the difference. So I just want ELL support, special education supports, literacy tutoring. Those are some of those things.
Yeah.
We've also had a shift away from a programmatic approach to developing teachers and their skills in teaching reading, and that's not a quick fix, and it takes time. So I wouldn't necessarily say it's more expensive per se. It's more expensive from a time perspective, professional development.
Okay.
And we've been very we've had lots of interventions, and that's always been our response. And we have been making a concerted effort to shift that away to strengthening our core instruction for students so that we don't need as many interventions, which kind of goes a little bit to what Dr. Ahart was saying. And that's a huge task and big work, and it's a huge shift from what we've done in the past. But in a lot of our schools for rigor work, that's been a big driving force, and we're garnering some really good results from that as well.
Okay, thank you. And then you mentioned there were issues that we were experiencing at certain schools, and one of them you mentioned was the efficacy and belief that we have that our students can actually learn, which is a big thing, because it seems like we just circled around to that at the end of the conversation about, well, if our expectations are low of our students, then why would we be surprised if they're not performing where we want them to be? So are there other major issues that you guys were seeing in certain schools that were problematic or barriers?
So I can go back to when Noel was talking about the targeted and intensive support schools, and that we had a couple that actually, decreased in regard to the progress they made. In a couple buildings, conditions were definitely an impediment, so that's really where the Office of Schools and our team comes in and partners with the Office of Academics. So when we see that happening, we can go in, and as a result of that, with 2 building leaders in particular, we made some significant structural changes in the building, providing
Conditions
support.
meaning?
Student behavior,
Typically, it's student behavior, but it's not
but
just
not
student
always.
behavior. Yeah.
Correct. Or, changes in resources or support that we provide at a building, that needs to adjust.
Meaning, sorry, you guys got to break this down for me. What are some of those?
Sure. So it might be how you're identifying staff to provide support, maybe at a particular grade level or in a particular area. If one of the conditions is behavior, maybe we look at what type of an interventionist is really needed. Is it targeted more in regard to literacy, or is it targeted more in regard to social skills support? And so just being able to make some of those changes and work through that with principals working through that with their director would be an example.
Another example is they're overhauling one of their leadership teams. One of the schools is overhauling their leadership team because it was obvious through this process that we didn't have the right people at the table.
Okay. And then, I know, and recognizing that we definitely have to do something, and that regarding our special education students and our ELL students, I have some questions. I'll ask those separately, but my other big question is, were there certain strategies that we've implemented that we believe had led to those improvements, particularly for most of our students of color that we saw?
I can't put my finger on anything. At this point, it would be all of the things that we've talked about, but I would argue that a lot of the success that we're seeing with African Americans in particular is simply due to the fact that we're paying closer attention. There's a constant spotlight on equity. So I think that's the first step. We don't stop there, but we are seeing some progress simply by looking at the data in that way and constantly asking the question of what are we doing for our students of color, and how are they performing, and how are they performing next week and the week after. And so rather than always just looking at data in the aggregate, really paying attention to particular subgroups.
Okay. And I think the other thing is...
And if I may, Susie,
Yep.
I just want to build on Noel's point a little bit more, because we have discovered this, particularly in a couple of those instances that you guys referenced, helping lift up. So where is it that we have expectations that are not equitable?
Mm-hmm.
And having the expectation not just of attending to, not just identifying where the challenges are, but the expectation that we eradicate those. They're not okay. And if that's the response, then we need to have a different kind of discussion with the folks who need to address that in that particular building. Anyway, so go ahead,
And we
Susie.
have some buildings who have made some significant progress, and so one of the things we've been able to do is follow up with them specifically to identify what is it that maybe that you are doing that might be a little bit different from other buildings, or what is it that's really helping you to be so successful with students, because we've really seen some great gains out of a couple of our buildings. And the interesting thing is, one of the common themes that I heard as I was following up, with buildings, and also heard, Noelle and her team talk about with the early literacy, the intensive and targeted support schools, is that monitoring piece, and just consistently having a structure and a system in place where they are always revisiting, always going back, always looking at all students and the progress that they are making, and the timely adjustments based on that. So they're not waiting to make adjustments or shifts or changes in their instruction. They're doing it, week to week, day to day. And so 2 of our schools who've made some significant progress and gains, that's one of the things that they've done. They've also been very targeted and very strategic about where they place staff. When we talk about in-class reading support, looking at those staff that have particular skills, training, and background that is really geared toward the foundational skills, and that they're going in and they're providing targeted support, working very closely with the classroom teacher year. And so that was another commonality between buildings, and can't necessarily pinpoint that, those are just the only things, because I think there's a lot of different approaches that buildings try. But the interesting part was between those two buildings, that those were some things that were very, that were common among both, that we can learn from and build on. And obviously, we need to dig into that even more.
Thank you.
Other board questions? Yes, Mr. Barron.
To the superintendent, I'm just going back to that pie graph that you showed us of the schools that were growing and the realization between growth and proficiency. At what point do the interventions at the school level be targeted more towards those schools that are consistently not growing, as opposed to the schools that are consistently lower achieving? I think I got the terminology right, too.
Yes. No, I do hear your question. So, so a couple of things. One, I'll try not to make this a really long answer. 2 years ago, I believe it was the last round of this school improvement grants from the federal government to support persistently low achieving schools. And there was a very limited amount of dollars available. And we got, and I wish Wilma Geidel were here to help take credit for this, because she worked really hard on this. But we took a chance and said, let's apply for all, I think we had 3 schools eligible. Let's apply for all 3. And then doing some background or some reconnaissance, I guess you'd call it, we discovered that likely, no matter how good the grants were, was not going to make it. And so we sat down with Thomas and his team, and we said, if we can get enough money, if we can get 2/3 of it, can we figure out a way to recreate what we're doing in those official SIG schools in a 3rd building, with the idea, because we thought we had a good idea for putting a support structure in place. So the idea is, apply this treatment, if you will, to these schools, and I don't have a concrete answer for you on this, except to say that if we're getting consistent results, for a trend, which I would define as at least 3 years, we talk about shifting those resources to the next school that is in most need. However, you do ask a very difficult question, and one that does not get asked in education outside of this district very much. So if a school is by all of the external measures a high-performing school, but we know that the students aren't growing, and we have this school over here that we would define as high-performing, the students are growing really fast, they're starting with us lower than these schools over here, or than these students over here, what is the right thing to do? What's the equitable thing to do?
Which fire do you put out?
Right, which fire do you put out? So I don't have a good answer to that, although I can tell you that we're actively, debating that and trying to figure out what's the right point to ease off of supports in a school that you could consider high need, but by our data is performing well, so that we can shift those to a school where, though it looks high performing, it's not really, it's high achieving, which perhaps they inherited, but we're not growing the students. So I don't have a good answer, except that it's very much on our mind, and we're having that moral debate regularly.
I guess I didn't expect an answer. I think that I bring it up because I could assume it is something that this board could be mulling over, or seeing the results of your conversations over the next 4 years.
Yeah, it's going to be hopefully more and more of a real issue in some ways, hopefully. But this graph here that I think is still up on everyone's screen is actually very encouraging to me.
Oh, it is, and you guys are doing a great job. I mean, you should be happy to bring this information to us. You should be, I don't think anybody on this board should expect a perfect report, just like we wouldn't expect that from our children. But I mean, there's some really great gains here. There's really great numbers, and you can tie them to the initiatives that you're putting forward. So you've got to feel pretty confident in the work that you're doing, and you should be encouraged for that.
Other board questions?
I just had one. So the first grade, FAST, is there like a big difference from the kindergarten to first grade testing? Do they have, is there, I mean, I know they kind of do kind of the dibbles, which is not called dibbles anymore, but.
Both kindergarten and first grade are a composite score. So they take subtests of different skills, and those actually change over time in kindergarten. At first grade, they do have to do a CBM, so it is really reading connected text.
Okay.
And in the fall, they have to read it with picture support, and then in the winter and the spring, the picture support's taken away. So it is real reading.
It's a big jump, like,
Yeah,
I mean.
it is, yep.
So that's probably
It is a
what's
big
happening.
jump, but I can't answer why 2 years ago we saw a dramatic increase, same test.
Same thing, oh,
And year 2, we didn't. So
yeah.
that's what we have
Was
to dig
trying
into.
to help.
I know, I appreciate that. Help us
Okay,
out.
all right.
Yeah.
So I just had one really, maybe, I'm not for sure what kind of question it is, but maybe it's a clarifying question. How's that? So if you look at the projections you have for meeting the spring benchmarks, K through 3, and we are progressively reducing the percentage of students, does that have to do with the level of rigor now, or the level of proficiency, comprehension, whatever, that you're expecting at the higher grades that didn't exist at the lower grades? Or I'm trying to figure out how I'm supposed to interpret that. So it goes, in kindergarten, we're showing 70% meeting spring benchmarks. In first grade, we're showing 60%, and in second and third, we're showing 55%. So does that have to do with the level of academic performance that we're expecting that increases as kids get older, that we have to recognize in how we're identifying and doing our benchmark projections?
Our projections are different than our goal. Our goal would be 80% across the board, regardless of the grade level. Our projections are based on the trend of where we currently are now and what's a reasonable expectation in 1 year's time to get to aspire to, even though our goal is 80, regardless of where they're starting. Does that answer your question? No?
Not really, but we can talk about it offline.
Okay.
I don't want to waste
We've struggled
everybody else's
honestly with
time.
how to go about setting projections, and it's simply based on trend at this time. But we would expect, even though our performance is not the actual percentage of kids meeting benchmark is declining as they're going up the grades, with the strong performance that we're seeing coming out of preschool, kindergarten, and first, that is a trend we hope to reverse, that we don't expect it to be high in kindergarten and then go down as you go up. It should actually increase.
Right.
But one of the things could be also, at the younger grades, we spend a significant amount of time on foundational skills. And teachers have time built into their schedules where it's very intentional and focused, and integrating that in a lot of different content areas. And not that they aren't doing that at second and third grade, but you're also bringing in a lot of other skills with students as far as being independent readers and being able to, gather information, learn from what they're reading. And so, there's a little bit of a shift there that maybe hypothesizing that, not as much time on those foundational skills may be, they may be taking at the second and third grade level, which then lets us know that that's something we need to be looking at and monitoring.
And the state data mirrors that too. It's higher at kindergarten and it goes down each grade level. So, I think, again, keeping it in the broader context, that's not where we want it to be, but we're not alone in that, where we're at, so.
I wanted to come up because of some of the data and information around special education. I just wanted you to know and have a clear idea that we are very dissatisfied with the data that you're seeing in terms of special education. So we are taking some very specific steps to address that data, and I wanted you to know that. It's kind of a tiered system. So Noelle talked a little bit about the literacy leadership team, and we have members who are special education people on that team, and so they are getting that information and also providing information to that leadership group so that there's a clear understanding about what best practices are and the kinds of things that we can be doing in all of our classrooms, including our special education classrooms. We are also looking at all of our teachers. Every teacher in Des Moines schools gets some excellent professional development, as we were talking about earlier, the instructional framework, for example, and all of the special education teachers, of course, are participating in that professional development. In addition to all of the district professional development, our teachers are going to be provided some additional strategies for teaching, more intensive strategies for teaching reading. We provided that training for 60 of our staff members last spring, and before the school year starts, we will have another 120 of our special education teachers trained in a multi-sensory method for teaching reading. So we're excited about that and really wanting to make sure that we're doing more in terms of strategies. In addition, our special education consultants are working individually with each one of our special education teachers. They are being required to meet with each teacher every month, and during that meeting, what they will be doing is looking at the individual student data. So we can look at those individual students and see how they are doing individually and what kinds of growth they are making, and targeting those conversations around the instruction that's provided, and then going back and looking again at the data and making some decisions about instruction. There were some questions earlier today about the data, and sometimes we're data rich and information poor. And so when we got this data, of course, one of the things we wanted to do is really dig in deep, and we're going to continue to do that. There is good data here, but we're going to gather some other things. I wanted to point out some of the data that you received. Table 1, for example, on FAST. If you look at Table 1 and then you compare that to Table 1 in the appendix, and you look specifically at special education, you'll see that we had 33% in the fall meeting the benchmark. In the winter, we had 31.79, and in the spring, we had 32.73. What you'll see from the table in the appendix is that our numbers are not the same numbers from the fall to the spring. So when students enter into school, they typically are not staffed for special education services. And so as time goes on, we staff the least proficient students into special education. So you will see in that second table that our number of students meeting the benchmark actually has increased. It's just that we have increased in numbers, and you'll see that throughout. So, for example, in that Table 1, we increased from 115 students to 225 students. In the second table, you'll see that we increased from 151 students to 257 students. So while the data is important and we are working hard to make improvements that we know we need to make, I just wanted it to be clear that the numbers that we're staffing in will change over time, so they're not the same students. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Thank you.
That's good.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Thanks, Shel.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any additional questions for the panel? I guess I would echo what Ms. Langford said. We had an opportunity to chat with the superintendent after our last set of monitoring reports and tried to again emphasize the kind of information that we thought would help the board to just sort of better understand without asking you to tell us what we can read, but rather assuming that we're going to read and helping to illuminate what the data is telling us. So I found it extremely helpful, and I hope that we can continue. I think you guys hit it out of the park, so thank you for that. The next item on our agenda is items of privilege, chair's report. I don't know that I have a lot to report. I feel like since the last board meeting, we did have our board candidate preparation, education, whatever we want to call it, session. And I just wanted to thank Harry and IASB for the role that they played in not only preparing what I heard was a great session, but also for those board members who were participating in setting that up, and for those of you who were able to be there. I think it was good feedback. I got here close to the end of the session, but I thought it was good and we had good attendance. So thank you for your leadership on that, Cindy, and Heather and Natasha. We appreciate that. And I don't think that I have anything else to report. So board members, anything that any of you would like to share? Hearing nothing, we'll go to superintendent's report.
Okay, I'm going to return to the political front for my comments this evening. I actually wrote something for, this is for anybody who's watching or who would like to watch it later online or on repeats on MediaCom. Congress is back in session this week for 3 weeks until their month-long August recess. These next weeks will determine the fate of school-based Medicaid, along with Medicaid generally and the Affordable Care Act. The magnitude of the healthcare debate in Washington is of the magnitude that occurs only rarely. All political tools available are being leveraged. In other words, there is tremendous pressure, especially on those in the Republican caucus, to pass some version of the current Senate bill. Medicaid is the third largest federal program serving urban schools like Des Moines Public Schools, behind only Title I and the school lunch program. If schools lose Medicaid, many of the services we provide and those dollars will have to be paid for with other funds because most of these services are required under IDEA, the Individuals with Disabilities Act, or as we usually refer to it, special education. What does that mean in Des Moines? It means that we will have to make up the approximately $3.5 million deficit that losing Medicaid will create every year. This is a deficit that will build on itself. This is the equivalent of nearly 40 full-time teachers every year. This will have a seriously negative impact on our entire system. This is not about special education students. This is about all of our students. If your senators do not know where you stand on this very important issue for all DMPS students, please reach out and make your opinions and concerns known to Senators Ernst and Grassley ASAP. Thank you. They're tired of hearing from me.
Thank you for that, Superintendent Ahart. And what I might suggest is that we do a letter on behalf of our board to our legislative delegation, articulating not only the importance of that, but also the impact on our budget and our ability to do our jobs if that actually passes. So why don't we go ahead and work with Deb to get something pinned on behalf of the board if everyone's in concurrence?
Okay.
Great. Thank you. Anything else, Superintendent Ahart?
That's it.
Without objection, our meeting is adjourned, and we will move into our work session shortly. Thank you.